The first sound that tore the quiet of my kitchen was his laugh, not a laugh I had heard in decades, but a sound I knew every way a human laugh could go wrong. I froze with a spoon half lifted to my mouth, tea cooling at my elbow, and for an instant the room folded into the year I would rather forget. It's late October, the light already gone, and you're all here, the little ones upstairs with flashlights under blankets, and the grown ones pretending the house isn't full of old bones and older stories. The kettle's on the counter, the lemon dishcloth is still damp from the dish I washed this morning, and there is a box on the table that I promised I would never open. The box has spent 30 years in my wardrobe, wrapped in newspaper that smells faintly of oil and cigarette smoke. Tonight, because you found it, because Lucy tugged my sleeve and said, "Grandma, what's in that box?" I let the lid lift. You should know I did not plan this. I never planned to tell you about the small, ordinary cruelties that made a life feel like walking with a loose stone in your shoe. But when Lucy's hand was small and sure on mine, and when Tom's eyes asked with that tired patience of young men who want to believe their parents did all the right things, I realized silence had weight too. It presses down on houses. It goes stagnant in the teapot. It sits in corners where the dust grows thick. Why did you hide it? Lucy asked, and she said it like a child might ask why a curtain is closed, straightforward, blunt, with no thought for the reasons that make adults knot their fingers together. I told them to let the box sit. I told them I'd rather they didn't know. I said that because lying by omission is easier than pulling a thread and watching the whole sweater unravel. You know what it's like to hold something together because the alternative is too loud. Tell us, Nana, Tom said. Please. We can handle it. He was leaning back in the chair like a man balancing a life on a hinge. There was the soft scrape of his sneakers against the linoleum. Outside, rain began to pulse against the window, like someone tapping in Morse code. I could smell the lemon from the dishcloth, the peat of the fireplace. The house hummed with ordinary things, the radio downstairs playing a song both old and familiar, and beneath it, a small beast of fear that had lived in me for years, waiting for the right hour to grow teeth. All right, I said. My voice was smaller than I felt. I'll tell you some of it. Not because I want you to know every raw edge, but because secrets are heavier when a single person carries them. Lucy climbed down from the table and sat on my knee like she did when she was 5 and had scraped her knee on the schoolyard. She smelled of toothpaste and rain. Did he hurt you? She asked. The question was blunt and terrible in its economy. He. That word could have been any number of people. A policeman. A lover. A father. In my story, he had been the man whose shadow stretched long across a small house and longer across my childhood. I had never given him a name to anyone but myself. Naming him would have been like setting him a chair at the table. I wouldn't do that. He hurt me, I said. Not in the neat, obvious way that people think of. In ways that never showed up on an X-ray. Ways that sound silly when you try to say them out loud. Like what? Tom asked. Like promises that were not promises, I said. Like being told I'm making things up because I'm forgetful. Like hands on the shoulder that stayed too long. Like someone sitting on the stairs and asking why I'm crying, and then telling me it was my fault for being so dramatic. Lucy tugged at my necklace without taking her eyes off me. What did you do? I smiled then, a small, bitter thing. I got good at silence. I got good at pretending. I made lists in my head of things that would keep me safe, the color of the carpet, the name of the postman, the exact time the milkman came. I breathed into a corner of my mouth. I learned which rooms were kind and which ones carried echoes I could not bear. There was a long moment of quiet that was not easy. The sound of the house shifted. You could hear the old clock in the hallway move its minute hand like it was deciding whether to keep time for us or for a memory. Why didn't you leave? Lucy asked. Why didn't you tell someone? Because leaving is a verb everyone thinks is simple until they are the one needing to do it. The street outside was a map of stops, the bakery, the bus, the church, all places I could have gone. But where would I go? The question sits with me like a stone. Where could a small frightened person carry the rest of their life? Sometimes staying is a strategy. Sometimes it is a child's mistake carried into adulthood. Once, I said, I went to the front door with shoes and a suitcase. I had a note in my pocket and the keys in my hand. I stood on the porch and a neighbor waved, and in his face was my whole town. I thought of my mother looking at me with that particular disappointment that felt worse than any blow. I went back inside. Tom's jaw clenched. You regret that, don't you? I thought about how regret is a room with many windows but no doors. Regret can teach, if you let it. Not all the time, I said. There are things I am proud of. I learned to cook for myself properly. I held a job. I paused because I wanted you to understand the small radical things that undergirded survival. I learned to repair a washing machine, I added, because you always laugh when I say that, and laughter softens the room. Did you ever tell him to stop? Lucy said. I laughed, a short rasp. I told myself often to be brave. I told myself to speak up. I told myself to be loud enough that someone else would hear. But words are slippery. His voice would cup around mine and make my words small. Did it get worse? Tom asked, and his voice was careful, like someone reaching for glassware in the dark. Sometimes, I said. But you should also know that it wasn't always violent in the ways you're thinking. There were breakfasts where he made proper eggs and whistled tunelessly. There were times when the house felt almost ordinary. That's the cruelest part, the sweetness and the hurt braided together so tight I never knew which I was living in. The laughter, his laugh, would come and the house would breathe out and I would pretend to join it. I looked at each of you. I wanted to tell you the whole thing with the clarity of a map, but maps lie. They fold. They hide the places people fall. How did you leave for good? Lucy whispered. I reached across to her and took both her hands. Her nails were bitten at the tips, probably from practicing speeches at work, probably from being small and big at once. I didn't leave for good the first time, I said. It took several tries. I left for a day, then a week. I took the bus to the next town and slept in a cheap room with paper-thin walls. I took a job in a bakery and learned to wake up at 4 in the morning to knead dough. There were nights when I called the number I had memorized in case of emergency and hung up because I was too ashamed to speak. Then what changed? Tom asked. What changed? I echoed. One Sunday in February, the snow was heavy like someone was laying a blanket over the world. I had been saving coins, hiding them in a biscuit tin. I had a letter from someone I trusted, a social worker whose name is a comfort to me still, and I had, more importantly, a tiny spark of something that felt like hope. I went to the neighbor who had once waved at me from the porch and I said, I need to go. He listened. He put my suitcase in his car, and we drove. The driver radio played a song about the sea and I remember thinking, will there ever be a time when my stomach doesn't feel like it's full of stones? I didn't know. I just got into the car. Lucy wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand like she was trying not to wake a sleeping child. Did he find you afterwards? No. Not then. Not at first. He came by once. He left a note that smelled of his pipe and apologies. I burned that note and then I started to write things down. I wrote when I had nightmares, what the nightmares were about, what the weather was like, what I ate for breakfast. I learned to name the things that were happening in me. Naming is small, ordinary bravery. There is so much more to tell in the way shadows move across a doorstep, in the way certain songs bring you back like a current you can't resist. But the kitchen was filling with the kind of honesty that turns a living room into a confessional, and beyond the honesty I could see, on the edge of the table, the box with its yellowing tape waiting like a patient animal. You were looking at me with those faces I have loved watching grow up, curious, impatient, protective. I'm not done, I told you. But I will not give you the worst parts and expect you to carry them without air. I'll tell you everything I can, but I will not let what happened define the sum of me. There are recipes, and songs, and stubbornness like a muscle that helped me rebuild. And yes, there is also rage. There's a rage that sometimes wakes me in the night and I make tea and I let it sit with me until it cools. There was a knock at the back door then, a solid sound, not his laugh. It startled us as if we'd been strung tight and someone touched the wrong note. I stood. You looked at each other and then back at me, because now the story had weight and the house was different. The rain had turned from a murmur to a steady patter. I could hear your breathing, quick and uneven. We can go on, Tom said. If you want. I nodded. I could feel the sand shift in my chest, the old patterns loosening a hair's breadth. The box still waited. The photograph inside had sharpened the edges of something I had kept flat for so long that it almost took me by surprise. I wasn't ready to burn the past or to let it eat me. I was ready to teach you, in as many small ways as it takes, how to hold a flame without being burned. We lifted the lid together. The first thing that slid out of the box was a photograph, curled at the corners, the ink faded to a sickly yellow. I hadn't touched it in 30 years. My fingers trembled so badly I nearly dropped it into the tea. It was me at 12 years old, standing in front of the little brick house with the green shutters. My hair was cut too short, my dress buttoned wrong. And there he was beside me, his hand on my shoulder, pressing just a little too hard. His smile was too wide, almost rehearsed. Mine was tight, small, like I was holding a secret in my teeth. Lucy gasped. Is that you, Nana? Yes. My throat was thick. That's me. Tom leaned forward, squinting. Who's the man? I didn't answer right away. The rain rattled the window, a steady drumbeat. I could hear the fridge humming, the pipes shifting like they always did before the heat kicked on. Every sound in the house seemed louder, like the world was leaning in, waiting for my answer. That, I said finally, is the man who was supposed to keep me safe. You both were quiet. Children have a way of knowing when silence carries more weight than words. Lucy traced the edge of the photograph with her fingertip. He looks normal. Most monsters do, I said. Tom's jaw tightened. He doesn't look like a monster to me. He just looks like somebody's dad. I met his eyes. Exactly. The kitchen seemed smaller then. My heart thudded, dragging me back to that day. I could smell the damp earth, the mildew from the shed behind the house, the faint tang of tobacco smoke that clung to him always. I could feel the sharp bite of the dress collar scratching against my neck. I remembered the way he squeezed my shoulder for the camera, hard enough to remind me not to move. You see that smile? I tapped the photo. It was for show. He wanted everyone to believe we were fine. That house was full of silence, but the kind that cuts you up. If I spoke too loud, if I laughed the wrong way, if I said I didn't like something he did, my voice faltered. I sipped my tea to steady it, though my hands shook so much the cup rattled against the saucer. Lucy leaned closer, her voice small. What did he do, Nana? The words crowded in my throat. I wanted to protect her. I wanted to protect you both. But protecting you with silence was the same thing that had chained me all those years. He taught me early that love came with strings, I said. That I owed him my obedience, my stillness, my gratitude. If I refused, the punishment wasn't always shouting or hitting. It was worse sometimes. He would smile. He would tell me how silly I was. He would tell me no one else would believe me. And after a while, I stopped believing myself. The kitchen clock ticked. The house seemed to hold its breath. Tom broke the stillness. Did anyone else know? Your mom? Your teachers? My mother saw what she wanted to see. He brought her flowers on Fridays. He fixed the car. He laughed with neighbors at the church picnic. To her, he was a man who worked hard and provided. To me, he was a man who entered my room when the house was dark and told me I was too sensitive when I flinched. Lucy pressed her face into my shoulder. I could feel her tears through my blouse. That's not fair. That's not fair at all. No, I said softly. It wasn't. I stared at the photograph again, that frozen moment. I wanted to rip it in two, to burn it like I burned the note he once left me. But something in me held back. Destroying it wouldn't erase the girl in the picture, wouldn't erase what she carried. That girl was still me. You know what the hardest part was? I whispered. It wasn't the nights or the whispers in the dark. It was the mornings. The way I had to stand in the kitchen and eat toast across from him, pretending nothing had happened. I had to laugh at his jokes. I had to call him what everyone else did. I had to play my part, as if the play would fall apart if I missed a line. Tom shook his head slowly, his hands curled into fists. I don't know how you did it. I survived, I said simply. That's how. I counted the cracks in the ceiling. I traced the pattern in the wallpaper until my eyes blurred. I thought about rivers, about water rushing away, about places far from that house. Some days I held on to the thought of leaving so hard it hurt. That hope was my rope. Lucy lifted her head. Did you ever tell your mom? I laughed, but it wasn't joyful. Once. I tried once. I was about 14. I said something, not even the whole thing, just a piece of it. I told her he made me uncomfortable, that I didn't like being alone with him. She slapped the table so hard the salt spilled. She said, "Don't you dare make up lies about that man. Don't you dare shame me in this house." The memory stung like it had happened yesterday. I could see my mother's flushed face, the tightness around her mouth, the way she refused to meet my eyes. She loved her reputation more than she loved my truth. Lucy's voice was shaky. So you stopped telling people? Yes, I said. I shut it all down. I built walls inside myself. But walls don't just keep pain out, they trap it in too. It seeped into everything. My smile, my voice, the way I sat in classrooms. Teachers thought I was lazy. Friends thought I was shy. No one asked why I flinched when someone touched my shoulder. No one wanted to see. The rain softened outside. A car passed down the street, tires hissing over wet pavement. I breathed in, and the air smelled faintly of smoke from the fireplace. The photograph still sat on the table, heavy as a stone. I kept that photo, I told you both, because it was proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That he existed, that I stood beside him, that I wasn't making it all up. When you live in silence long enough, you start to doubt your own memory. That photo was my anchor. Tom reached across the table and covered my hand with his. His palm was warm, solid. You don't need proof anymore, Nana. We believe you. The tears came fast then, faster than I could stop them. I hadn't cried in front of anyone in years. My chest ached with the weight of it. Thank you, I whispered. That's all I ever wanted. For someone to believe me. Lucy squeezed me tighter. We believe you. We love you. The kettle whistled, shrill and sudden. I stood to take it off the burner, grateful for the excuse to wipe my face. The steam rose in a cloud, carrying the sharp smell of metal and limescale. I poured the water slowly, watching it swirl over the tea leaves, darkening into something rich and bitter. As I set the kettle down, I felt a shift inside me. Small, but real. Like a door cracking open in a room I'd sealed for too long. The photograph still lay on the table, but it no longer looked like just proof. It looked like a beginning. I turned back to you both. Do you want to hear the rest? Tom nodded without hesitation. Lucy's eyes were red, but she whispered, yes. I sat down again, folding my hands around the warm cup. Then listen closely. Because the story doesn't end with me trapped in that house. It doesn't end with silence. It ends with me finding a way out, and with me sitting here tonight, telling you, so that none of us have to carry this alone. And just like that, the memory began to unspool again, pulling me back to the night when everything finally broke. The night it all broke open is still sharp in my memory, like glass that never dulls. It was winter, bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones no matter how many sweaters you pile on. The house smelled of coal smoke and boiled cabbage, heavy and sour. I remember lying awake in my small room, listening to the floor creak under his footsteps. Every creak was a countdown. When the door opened, I froze. I'd learned to breathe shallow, to let my body turn into a plank of wood. If I was quiet enough, maybe he'd go away. That was the lie I told myself, night after night. But lies only carry you so far. He sat on the edge of my bed. I could smell the bitter tang of whiskey on his breath, the wool of his coat damp from snow. His hand landed on the blanket over my legs, heavy and certain. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But at 15, I had already been taught that my voice had no weight. Still, something in me cracked. I couldn't play dead anymore. Stop, I said. My voice was small but steady. He chuckled, low and cold. Don't be silly. You know you like the attention. Those words, I still hear them, even now. They made me feel smaller than I already was, like my whole body had shrunk to the size of a pin. No, I whispered. I don't. For the first time, I pushed his hand away. Not hard, not loud, but enough. Enough for him to pause, his face twisting with something between anger and amusement. You'll regret that, he said. And then he left the room, closing the door with a soft click that sounded louder than a slammed one. I didn't sleep at all. I lay there shaking, staring at the ceiling. And by morning, something had shifted in me. Fear was still there, but it was different now. It wasn't paralyzing anymore. It was pushing me towards something. At breakfast, he sat across from me, buttering toast, humming under his breath like nothing had happened. My mother was frying eggs, the smell of grease filling the air. I stared at my plate, my chest pounding. I'm leaving, I blurted. The knife froze in his hand. My mother turned from the stove, spatula raised. What did you say? I'm leaving, I repeated. My voice cracked, but I didn't care. I can't stay here anymore. My mother's face darkened. Don't be ridiculous. Where would you go? I'll find somewhere, I said. Anywhere is better than here. Her mouth opened and closed, fish-like, searching for words. He laughed, that same laugh that had followed me into my kitchen years later. It rolled over the table, cruel and knowing. You'll be back in a day, he said. You don't have the guts to make it on your own. My hands shook as I shoved back from the table. Watch me, I whispered. I didn't even pack properly. Just threw clothes into a pillowcase, grabbed the few coins I'd hidden away, and walked out the front door. The air was sharp with frost, biting my cheeks. Each step down the street felt impossible, like the ground would split open and swallow me back into that house. But I kept walking. Past the church. Past the bakery. Past the schoolyard where I used to sit alone. I ended up at the bus station. My fingers were numb as I counted the coins. Not enough for a ticket to anywhere far. Just enough for the next town over. I bought the ticket anyway. The bus smelled of diesel and wet wool, the windows fogged from everyone's breath. I pressed my forehead to the glass and watched the snow blur the world into white streaks. My stomach clenched, a mix of terror and freedom. When I got off, the town wasn't much different. Same grey streets, same tired shops. But it wasn't his town. That mattered. I found a room above a bakery. The landlady was a sharp-eyed woman with flour on her apron. She didn't ask questions, just handed me a key when I slid my coins across the counter. The room was small, with peeling wallpaper and a bed that sagged in the middle. But it was mine. For the first night in years, no footsteps came down the hall toward me. I lay awake anyway. The silence was deafening. Without fear filling every corner, I didn't know what to do with myself. My mind replayed every word he'd said, every laugh, every touch I'd tried to erase. I wanted to scrub my own skin off. I wanted to vanish. But I didn't vanish. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of bread baking downstairs. Warm, yeasty, comforting. I followed the smell to the kitchen where the landlady was kneading dough, her arms dusted with flour. Up early, she said without looking at me. I couldn't sleep. My voice was hoarse. She handed me a lump of dough. Then make yourself useful. I stared at it, dumbfounded. I don't know how. Then learn, she said. So I did. I pushed and folded the dough, my hands clumsy, my shoulders aching. The landlady corrected me once, twice, then let me be. And as I worked, something strange happened. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was building instead of breaking. That bakery saved me in ways I can't fully explain. The rhythm of kneading. The smell of loaves rising. The warmth of ovens chasing away the cold. It gave me structure when everything else had collapsed. But it wasn't enough to erase him. He still found me, weeks later. I was sweeping the bakery floor one evening when the bell above the door jingled. I looked up and froze. He stood there, tall and familiar, snow melting on his shoulders. His eyes found me instantly, and that smile spread across his face, slow, certain, like he'd known all along where I'd run. The broom slipped from my hand. My throat closed. The landlady looked between us, frowning. "Can I help you?" "I'm here for my girl," he said smoothly. She ran away. You know how teenagers are. My chest clenched. Every instinct screamed at me to shrink, to let him take me, to go quietly like always. But the dough, the ovens, the warmth of this place, they had given me something. A spine. "She's not your girl," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough. "Not anymore." The landlady crossed her arms, standing solid as a wall. "She's working here. If you've got business, take it somewhere else." His smile faltered. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, doubt. He muttered something under his breath, turned on his heel, and left. The bell jingled again, the door slammed, and just like that, he was gone. I collapsed onto the flour-dusted floor, sobbing. The landlady didn't touch me, didn't fuss. She just let me cry until I could breathe again. That night, lying in my little room, I realized something. He was not invincible. He could be turned away. And I could be believed. I looked at you both across the kitchen table, my tea long gone cold. That was the night I stopped being just a victim, I told you. I wasn't free yet, not fully. But I had proof that his power over me wasn't absolute. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Lucy whispered, "Were you scared he'd come back again?" I nodded. Terrified. Every day. But fear and freedom can live side by side. You just have to choose which one you'll feed. I picked up the old photograph from the table, the edges trembling between my fingers. That night in the bakery was the first time someone stood beside me. It was the first time I felt like the truth had a witness. And that changes everything. I set the photo down. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the world hushed. But inside me, the storm was still swirling. The morning after he came to the bakery, I woke up with my stomach in knots, certain I'd see him waiting in the street. I crept to the window, peeling back the thin curtain. The town was hushed under snow, smoke rising from chimneys, children dragging sleds through the slush. No sign of him. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled without choking on my own breath. But fear doesn't vanish. It lingers in the corners of your mind, waiting for quiet moments to crawl back in. Every time the bell over the bakery door rang, I jumped. Every time footsteps echoed behind me in the street, my heart thudded. I kept expecting his hand on my shoulder again. The landlady, Mrs. Givens, must have noticed. One afternoon, as I was shaping rolls, she dusted flour from her apron and said, "He's not coming back." "Not here." "You don't know him," I whispered. She leaned close, her eyes steady. "And you don't know me. I don't scare easy. If he shows his face again, he'll answer to me." I wanted to believe her. But believing felt dangerous, like leaning against a wall that might give way. Still, her words planted something small inside me. A seed. That week, she let me help at the counter. I stood behind the glass case of pastries, the sweet smell of cinnamon and butter filling the air, and for the first time I spoke to strangers without my voice shaking. Simple things, "Would you like a bag for that? Fresh out of the oven this morning." Ordinary words that made me feel almost ordinary. But at night, alone in my room, the memories wouldn't leave me. I'd lie there staring at the cracked ceiling, his voice echoing in my head. "Don't be silly. You like the attention." Some nights I pressed my nails into my palms until little half-moons bloomed red, just to remind myself I was here, in this room, not back in that house. I thought I could outrun it. That if I worked hard enough, baked enough bread, built a new life, the past would loosen its grip. But trauma doesn't let go just because you leave the room where it happened. It follows. One evening, after closing, Mrs. Givens sat me down at the wooden table in the back. She poured tea into two mismatched mugs. The air smelled of yeast and steam. "You've got shadows in your eyes," she said. "You going to tell me why?" I froze. My first instinct was silence. Silence had been my shield for so long it felt dangerous to lower it. But her gaze was steady, not prying, just patient. "I can't," I whispered. "You can," she said gently. "You don't have to, but you can." And something cracked open. Words spilled out of me in broken pieces. I didn't give her details, not everything, I couldn't, not yet. But I told her enough. Enough for her to set her mug down and reach across the table, her rough baker's hand covering mine. "Listen to me," she said, her voice firm. "What happened to you was not your fault. Not one bit of it. You didn't deserve it. And you don't have to carry it alone anymore." No one had ever said that to me before. My throat closed around tears I'd been swallowing for years. I cried until my chest hurt, and she just sat there, holding my hand, letting me unravel. When the tears slowed, she said, "There are people who can help. Real help. Not just me." "I don't want anyone to know," I said quickly, panic rising. "They'll say I'm lying. They'll say I asked for it." She shook her head. "You're not lying. And you didn't ask for anything. But if you keep this locked up, it'll eat you alive. You deserve more than survival. You deserve peace." Those words stayed with me. Deserve. I had never thought of myself as someone who deserved anything. I'd thought of myself as someone who endured. Who kept quiet. Who made herself small. But deserve, that was new. A few days later, she gave me a slip of paper with a name and a number. She's a social worker, Mrs. Givens said. Good woman. Call her when you're ready. I kept that paper folded in my pocket for weeks. I touched it like a talisman, but I didn't dare use it. Every time I thought of dialing, I heard my mother's voice, "Don't you dare shame me in this house." Then one night, I had a dream. I was back in my old room, the wallpaper peeling, the smell of whiskey thick in the air. He was sitting on my bed, smiling that smile. But when I opened my mouth, instead of silence, a scream tore out of me, so loud the glass shattered in the windows. I woke up shaking, my throat raw, tears streaming. And I knew. I couldn't keep carrying it alone. The next morning, I walked to the corner payphone with the slip of paper in my hand. My fingers shook as I dialed. A woman's voice answered, calm and warm. "This is Anne." I couldn't speak at first. Just breathed into the receiver. "It's all right," she said softly. "Take your time." And so I did. For the first time in my life, I told someone the truth. Not the watered-down version. Not the half-story. The truth. My words stumbled, broke, but they came out. And she listened. Really listened. No disbelief. No dismissal. Just steady, quiet belief. When I finished, there was a long silence. My heart pounded. Then she said, "You are so brave. And you are not alone anymore." I clutched the receiver, tears sliding down my cheeks. In that moment, I felt something shift again. Like the chains I'd been dragging had loosened, even if they weren't gone yet. I looked at you both across the kitchen table, your faces pale, eyes wide. That call was the start of my freedom, I told you. Not the end, not yet. But the start. Because once you speak the truth out loud, it becomes harder for others to bury it. Tom leaned forward. "Did she help you get away for good?" I nodded. "Yes. But that part of the story, that was a battle all its own." I set my cold tea aside. My hands trembled as I pressed the photograph flat against the table. When you start breaking free, the world doesn't always clap for you. Sometimes it fights you harder. Sometimes the people who should have stood by you are the ones who turn away. I took a long breath, the old ache rising again. And that's what came next. When I told Anne everything, the whole truth, without the polite disguises or the silences, I expected her to recoil. Instead, she leaned closer over the receiver, her voice steady through the crackle of the line. "You did the right thing," she said. "You're safe now. But we need to make sure you stay safe." Safe. That word landed like a stone in my stomach. I had never trusted it. Safe was the silence before the door creaked open, the lull before the laugh. Safe was a lie. "I don't believe in safe," I whispered. "That's all right," she said. "You don't have to believe in it yet. I'll believe enough for both of us." For the next weeks, Anne became a voice I clung to. We met in a cramped office above the post office. The air smelled of paper and dust, her desk piled with files. She offered me tea in a chipped mug, and I sat in the corner chair with my knees pressed together, like a child in the headmistress's office. "Tell me about your mother," she said one afternoon. My throat tightened. She didn't want to hear it. I tried once. She told me never to speak of it again. And if you told her now, she'd call me a liar. Or worse, she'd believe me and still choose him. Anne's eyes softened. That's a terrible choice for a mother to make. But her blindness doesn't change your truth. Her words sank deep, though I didn't say so. For years, I had believed my mother's refusal was proof that I was unworthy. That maybe I had imagined it. But Anne said it like a fact, my truth was my truth, even if the whole world turned away. Still, the world did turn away. The first time I went back to my old town, it was because Anne encouraged me. Closure matters, she said. You don't have to face him, but you should reclaim the streets that raised you. So I took the bus. The town looked smaller than I remembered, the houses hunched against the wind, the church steeple leaning like a tired man. My feet carried me toward the little brick house with the green shutters before I even realized it. My mother answered the door. Her face looked older, her hair grayer, but her eyes, sharp, assessing, hadn't changed. "What are you doing here?" she asked flatly. "I needed to see you," I said. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "I told someone. About him. About what he did to me." For a second, I thought she might pull me inside, hold me, cry. Instead, she stiffened. "Don't you dare drag our name through the mud." "It's not mud," I said, my throat burning. "It's the truth." Her jaw tightened. "He worked every day to put food on this table. He gave you a roof. And this is how you repay him? With lies?" I felt my stomach drop. "You know it's not lies." Her voice rose. "Get out before he sees you. You'll only cause trouble." Trouble. My laugh cracked into something closer to a sob. "He stole my childhood, and you call it trouble?" She slammed the door in my face. I stood there in the snow, my whole body trembling, my breath clouding in the air. Neighbors passed on the street, nodding politely. To them, I was just a girl grown tall, come home for a visit. They had no idea I was breaking apart on the doorstep. When I got back to the bakery, Mrs. Givens took one look at me and pressed a steaming mug of cocoa into my hands. I couldn't even drink it. I sat at the table, my tears falling into the foam. "She turned me out," I whispered. "She doesn't get to decide your worth," Mrs. Givens said. But it still felt like she had. My own mother had chosen him over me. Again. For weeks after, I wrestled with that rejection. It gnawed at me in the night. If your own mother won't believe you, who will? I baked loaves until my hands blistered. I scrubbed the counters until they gleamed. I tried to scrub him out of me. But every knock at the door sent me spiraling, convinced it was him come back to drag me home. And then one evening, he did return. I was carrying trays to the front when the bell jingled and there he was, older, heavier, but still him. His eyes locked on mine, and my body went rigid. "Come on," he said smoothly, as if no years had passed. "Your mother's worried sick. Time to stop this nonsense." The tray slipped from my hands, rolls scattering across the floor. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. Mrs. Givens came out from the back. "Not this again," she said firmly. "Leave her be." He ignored her. His hand reached for my arm. That familiar grip. That familiar weight. My body screamed no. But this time, I didn't freeze. I pulled back. My voice came out louder than I expected, breaking open the quiet shop. "Don't touch me." The words rang against the glass case, echoed in the tiled floor. Customers turned. Mrs. Givens stepped between us. "You heard her," she said, her voice like steel. "Leave." For a moment, he looked at me, really looked. Shock flickered across his face. Maybe because I'd spoken out loud. Maybe because there were witnesses. Then he muttered something under his breath and left, slamming the door so hard the bell clanged. I stood there shaking, my breath ragged. And then the strangest thing happened. A customer, an old man who bought rye bread every Thursday, nodded at me. "Good girl," he said softly, as if I'd done something ordinary but important. It hit me then, the silence was broken. Once you say the truth out loud, it becomes harder for others to ignore. That night, I sat in my little room with the slip of paper from Anne in my lap. I called her again. My voice was hoarse, but strong enough. "I want to press charges," I said. The line went quiet for a moment. Then she answered, "All right. We'll do this together." I looked at you both, sitting across from me at my kitchen table, your eyes wide, your hands tight around your cups. That was when the real battle began, I told you. Because naming the truth is one thing. Standing up to the world that doesn't want to hear it, that's another story entirely. The day I walked into that courthouse, I felt like I was stepping into a furnace. The air was heavy with the smell of polish and dust, benches lined with strangers who avoided my eyes. My palms were slick, and my knees shook under my skirt. I had told myself I was ready, but truthfully, no one is ever ready to face the man who stole their childhood, not in front of a judge, not with the whole town watching. And sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine. "Just breathe," she whispered. I nodded, though breathing felt like pulling air through a straw. Across the room, he sat at a long table with his lawyer, shoulders squared, eyes darting over at me like I was some unruly child about to be disciplined. My mother sat behind him. She didn't look at me. Her gaze stayed fixed on the floor, as though her loyalty had been nailed down. When my name was called, I stood. The walk to the stand felt endless, each step echoing like a hammer strike. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore my oath, and then the questions began. The prosecutor's voice was kind, steady. He asked me to tell the truth of what had happened in that house, in that bedroom with the locked door. My mouth went dry, my tongue heavy. For a moment, I couldn't speak at all. Then I looked at Anne, at her steady eyes. I thought of Mrs. Givens, of her warm kitchen and her cocoa. I thought of the rye-bread man nodding at me. And I thought of you, though you weren't even born yet, the grandchildren I hoped someday would exist, and how I couldn't bear the thought of you carrying this silence too. So I spoke. My voice cracked, but it carried. "He came into my room at night," I began. The courtroom blurred at the edges. I forced myself to keep going. "He said if I told anyone, no one would believe me. He said my mother would hate me. He said I'd be taken away." Each sentence felt like tearing open a wound. I saw people shift uncomfortably on the benches, heard someone cough, felt the scrape of the chair beneath me. I wanted to disappear, but I didn't stop. Then came the cross-examination. His lawyer, a man with a neat grey suit and sharp eyes, rose and circled me like a wolf. "Isn't it true," he said, "that you have a history of telling stories?" "No," I answered, my voice thin. "Didn't you once tell your classmates your father was a war hero?" I swallowed. "I was a child." "A child who lies," he said smoothly. "I wasn't lying," I snapped. My cheeks burned. I was wishing. The judge banged his gavel. The lawyer smirked. He pressed harder. "Why didn't you say anything sooner? Why now, after all these years?" My throat closed. For a moment, I almost faltered. And then I thought of the night in the bakery when I shouted, "Don't touch me." The power of those words. "Because I was scared," I said. My voice rose, shaking but strong. "Because I thought no one would believe me. Because my own mother told me to be silent. But silence doesn't mean it didn't happen." The room went still. The lawyer frowned, shuffled his papers, tried to trip me again. But something in me had shifted. I had spoken the truth under oath. No one could take that back. Still, the battle didn't end when the gavel finally struck. The trial stretched on for weeks. And outside the courthouse, whispers grew louder. In the grocery store, 2 women turned away as I passed. At church, I felt stares prick the back of my neck. Someone muttered, "Home wrecker," under their breath. As if I was the one who had wrecked anything. The worst came one morning when I found a note slipped under the bakery door. "Liar. Stop ruining good men's lives." My hands shook as I read it. Mrs. Givens snatched it from me, tore it to pieces, and threw it in the bin. Cowards, she spat. They don't know a thing. But I knew what people were saying. That I was troubled. That I was making it up for attention. That decent girls kept their heads down. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I burst into Anne's office, tears streaking my face. Why does everyone hate me for telling the truth? She rose from her desk, put her arms around me. Because truth unsettles people more than lies ever do, she murmured. Lies keep things neat. Truth breaks the picture frame. Her words stayed with me. When the verdict finally came, it was not the thunderclap I had imagined. He was convicted, yes, though only on a single count, and sentenced to a handful of years that felt pitiful compared to what he had stolen from me. My mother didn't even glance at me as the bailiff led him away. She sat stone-faced, as though she'd lost her husband instead of admitting she'd lost me long before. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt hollow. Justice doesn't sew the pieces of you back together. It doesn't erase the nights or give back the years. But it did something small. It cracked open the silence. Afterward, I walked out of the courthouse into the bright sunlight. The air smelled of rain on pavement. My chest ached, but for the first time, I felt like the weight on it was mine to carry, not his. That night, I sat alone in my little rented room. I lit a candle and watched the flame dance. I whispered to myself, "You survived. You spoke. You were heard." It wasn't triumph. It wasn't healing. But it was a beginning. And as I sit here now, telling you this with my voice quivering, I want you to remember one thing: courage doesn't feel like courage when you're living it. It feels like shaking knees and a stomach full of stones. It feels like standing alone in a room where everyone wants you silent. But courage is simply speaking anyway. Because silence is what destroys us. After the trial, the town no longer felt like home. Every street corner carried whispers. Every glance at the market or post office carried judgment. Even when no one said a word, I heard it in their silence: that girl, the one who dragged her father into court. So I left. I packed my things in 2 small suitcases, hugged Mrs. Gibbons so tightly I thought my ribs might crack, and boarded a bus heading west. I remember staring out the window as the bakery disappeared, the only safe place I had ever known, shrinking into the horizon. My chest ached, but my feet itched for a new start. The city was loud and dirty, with streets that smelled of exhaust and roasted chestnuts, men shouting on corners, neon signs flickering in the drizzle. No one knew me there. No one cared about my story. I thought that was freedom, and in a way it was, though loneliness followed me like a shadow. I rented a tiny room above a laundromat. The pipes groaned, the wallpaper peeled, and the floor slanted enough that marbles rolled to the corner. But it was mine. No footsteps down the hall at night. No lock snapping shut behind me. I slept with the window open, letting the city's hum drown the old sounds of creaking doors. Still, the scars came with me. I wanted so badly to be normal, to laugh like other young women, to go dancing, to let someone's hand rest easy on the small of my back. But every time a man leaned too close, my stomach turned to ice. Every time a door clicked shut, my lungs seized. I remember one evening, a kind man named Peter asked me to dinner. He worked at the newspaper, wore glasses that slipped down his nose, and had a laugh that tumbled out awkwardly, like he was surprised by it himself. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to. But when he reached for my hand across the cafe table, I froze. My body stiffened like stone. He noticed. He pulled back, confused. Did I do something wrong? I shook my head, words tangled in my throat. No. It's me. He tilted his head. I don't understand. How could I explain to someone kind, someone untouched by the poison of my past, that a simple touch could feel like fire against my skin? That my own body betrayed me with fear where there should have been warmth. I didn't call him back. For years, I thought I was broken beyond repair. That intimacy was for other people, people who hadn't been taught to fear it. I buried myself in work, first as a seamstress, then as a clerk in a bookshop. I liked the smell of ink and paper, the order of the shelves. Books didn't reach for me. They didn't demand. They waited quietly until I was ready to open them. But healing doesn't come in one sweep. It comes in cracks and splinters, in tiny shifts you hardly notice. One of those shifts came the day I adopted a stray cat. She was a scrappy grey thing I found crying in the alley, her ribs showing, her fur patchy. When I tried to pick her up, she clawed my arm. But I couldn't leave her there. I coaxed her with bits of tuna until she followed me upstairs. For weeks, she hid under the bed. Only at night would she creep out and curl against my feet. Slowly, carefully, she began to trust me. And in caring for her, I learned something I hadn't expected. Gentleness isn't about grand gestures. It's about patience. It's about showing up day after day, even when the other person flinches. That lesson cracked something open in me. Years later, when I met the man who would become your grandfather, I carried those lessons with me. He wasn't flashy, wasn't smooth. He was steady. Patient. He never rushed me. If I pulled away, he waited. If I froze, he softened his voice and gave me space. One evening, sitting on a park bench, he said quietly, "I don't need to know everything that hurt you. Not unless you want me to. But I want to be the one who proves it doesn't have to hurt anymore." I cried right there, in the middle of the park with strangers walking by. Not because I was sad, but because it was the first time I believed love might not be another trap. Even then, the shadows lingered. Nights when I startled awake, heart pounding, convinced I was back in that house. Days when I snapped at kindness because kindness felt unfamiliar. I carried those scars into marriage, into motherhood. When your mother was born, I remember holding her in my arms, her skin soft as milk, her tiny fingers curling around mine. The room smelled of antiseptic and powder, nurses bustling around, your grandfather beaming with pride. But all I could think was, I will never let her feel what I felt. That vow became my compass. Through exhaustion, through fear, through every mistake I made as a young mother, I clung to it. I would raise her in a house where doors were safe to close, where voices didn't wound, where touch was gentle and love was not tangled with harm. It wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect. The past doesn't let go so easily. There were days I was distant, days I seemed distracted, days I wept in secret because the weight of what I carried felt too heavy. But I kept my promise. I built a life where she could laugh freely, where bedtime meant stories instead of terror, where truth was welcome instead of punished. That's how survival turns into legacy. Not by erasing the pain, but by refusing to pass it on. As I tell you this now, with the tea cooling in our cups and the evening light slipping through the curtains, I want you to understand something. Love didn't cure me. It didn't erase what was done. But it gave me a chance to write a different ending. And that's the greatest rebellion I know. I'm an old woman now. The years have gathered in my hands, in the lines around my mouth, in the way my knees complain each morning when I rise. The sharpness of those early memories has dulled with time, but the weight of them, the shape of them, has never disappeared. Trauma doesn't dissolve, it simply weaves itself into the fabric of who you become. Sometimes I wonder if you see it when you look at me. If you notice the way I flinch at sudden knocks on the door, or how I keep a lamp burning at night, even though I tell you it's for convenience. Maybe you've guessed. Or maybe you just think I'm like any grandmother, full of quirks and caution. But I needed you to hear it from me, plain and unvarnished. Because silence is the soil where shame grows, and I will not hand you that inheritance. When I was your age, I thought survival was about pretending. Pretending I was fine. Pretending the hurt wasn't real. Pretending the man who hurt me was a father. But pretending is only another kind of cage. It keeps you alive, yes, but it does not let you live. It took me decades to learn that. I want you to know, all of you, sitting here with your wide eyes and your hands folded, that pain doesn't define you. It shapes you, yes, the way fire shapes glass. But it doesn't own you. You can take it, acknowledge it, and still choose who you will be. That's the legacy I want to leave. Not the darkness. Not the silence. But the choice. There were times I doubted I had anything to give. Times when I was sure I would break my promise to your mother. But when I look at her now, at you, I see proof that cycles can end. That love can be rebuilt, piece by trembling piece. I remember once, years ago, your grandfather took my hand in the garden. The air smelled of tomatoes and earth. He said, "You're stronger than you think." At the time, I laughed, called him sentimental. But now I know he was right. Strength isn't loud. It isn't about shouting or winning battles. Strength is surviving the night and still choosing to greet the dawn. It's raising children with gentleness even when gentleness was never given to you. It's telling the truth even when the world covers its ears. As I finish this story, I don't want you to carry my sorrow. I want you to carry my lesson. If ever life gives you a burden that feels too heavy, remember this: you can break the silence. You can ask for help. You can walk away from what hurts you, even if the world calls it disloyal. Especially then. And most of all, remember that healing isn't a destination. It's a path you walk, some days forward, some days back. But every step is yours, and no one can take that away. So when I'm gone, when this house is empty and only memories remain, promise me you'll tell the truth of your own lives. Promise me you won't hide from it, or bury it, or let anyone tell you it's not worth speaking. Because truth, children, truth is the only inheritance worth leaving. And that is my gift to you.